Welcome to today's video on the extract from the Prelude by William Wordsworth. So if you can get your anthologies ready or something to take some notes, we will begin. Okay, if you can turn please to page 28 and 29 in your anthologies and read along. So, extract from the Prelude. One summer evening, led by her, I found a little boat tied to a willow tree within a rocky cove, its usual home. Straight I unloosed her chain, and stepping in, pushed from the shore. It was an act of stealth and troubled pleasure, nor without the voice of mountain echoes did my boat move on, leaving behind her still, on either side, small circles glittering idly in the moon until they melted all into one track of sparkling light. But now, like one who rose proud of his skill to reach a chosen point with an unswerving line, I fixed my view upon the summit of a craggy ridge. The horizon's utmost boundary, far above, was nothing but the stars and the grey sky. She was an elfin pinnace. Lustily I dipped my oars into the silent lake, and as I rose upon the stroke, my boat went heaving through the water like a swan, when, from behind that craggy steep till then the horizon's bound, a huge peak, black and huge, as if with voluntary power instinct upreared its head. I struck and struck again, and growing still in stature, the grim shape towered up between me and the stars, and still, for so it seemed, with a purpose of its own and measured motion like a living thing, strode after me. With trembling oars I turned, and through the silent water stole my way back to the covert of the willow tree. There, in her mooring place, I left my bark, and through the meadows homeward went, in grave and serious mood. But after I had seen that spectacle, for many days, my brain worked with a dim and undetermined sense of unknown modes of being. Oh, my thoughts, there hung a darkness, call it solitude or blank desertion. No familiar shapes remained. No pleasant images of trees, of sea or sky, no colours of green fields, but huge and mighty forms that do not live like living men, moved slowly through the mind by day and were a trouble to my dreams. Now that you've listened to the poem all the way through, I've got 5 images here which I would like you to connect to lines of the poem. This will ensure that you've got some imagery to discuss and help you to collect some quotations that you can discuss later on in your amity. So if you can pick out these 5 lines in the poem and match them up to the imagery, please. Before we look at length at the actual poem and its contents, I'd like to have a chat about the context of this poem. So this poem comes from the Romantic period, which I know you will have looked at with your English teachers with regards to some of the other poems. So contextually, the Romantic period with regards to this poem can be split into 2 particular sections. So firstly, we need to talk about the sublime. So the word sublime is about the power of nature and man's insignificance against this grand backdrop of nature. William Wordsworth, obviously in this poem, really epitomise the sublime here, because we have this singular child who is overwhelmed by the power of nature that surrounds him, and it impacts the rest of his life. In that shown in the way that he reflects back upon this experience having shaped him. Also in the Romantic period, we have this idea about individual experience, and how this individual experience can shape a person and make them reflect back on the past and how that enlightens their future. Now that's exactly what happens in this poem. Wordsworth begins to reflect on how this experience has shaped his future and his respect for nature and his own feelings and thoughts. William Wordsworth was from the Lake District, which is where this poem is set. This is a reflection back on a childhood experience from the Prelude. Now, the Prelude is an epic, and I don't mean that as amazing, although it is in some way amazing. I mean it as in grand and huge poem that spans his entire lifetime. And this is an extract, a snippet from this epic poem, and this particular snippet is from the childhood experiences that he had. William Wordsworth was considered almost the godfather of the Romantic period and Romantic poetry. He was a poet laureate, he was well respected, he made lots of money from his poetry, so obviously that's why he's considered in this anthology. This poem is all about individual experience, the power of nature, the sublime. It epitomizes this period in time. Now, because this is a Romantic period poem, we have quite a lot of what we would think of as antiquated language in here. So what I've done for you is I've made you a vocab table, which you can jot down in your notes or make sure that you can match up to the lines in the poem. You'll see I do love a coloured pen that I have sectioned off and put it in chronological order. So each chunk then relates to the highlighting on the next slide. If you want to go crazy with coloured pens like me, then you're more than welcome to, but that is just because I like to make things pretty. Right, so first off, we've got unloosed. If you are unloosed, you are set free. It's been removed. So he unloosed her chain. The her in this instance is the boat. Stealth. If you move in stealth, it means you're cautious, you're really secretive. We think about burglars and people moving in stealth. Then we have idly. If you are idle, it means you have no purpose or reason to be. It means you're quite lazy. Then we have unswerving. If you're unswerving, it means you're not swerving and therefore straight and direct. A summit is the peak of a mountain, the very top of the mountain. Craggy is from the crags in the mountains, which means it's rocky and rough. Utmost is highest. So if something is of the utmost importance, it is of the highest importance. Elfin means elf-like, so it's feminine, it's female, a female elf. That's also what my first name means, apparently, means elfin. Pinnace. A pinnace is a small boat, particularly one with a pointed front and a curved back. Lustily. Now, if you do something lustily, it means you are hungry for sex and passionate. Voluntary. If something is voluntary, it is deliberate and given freely. Upreared. If something uprears its head, it means it raises up as if it's about to attack or strike, like a serpent raises up. Stature. Something's stature is its height or telling us that it is standing. Strode. A stride is a long and deliberate step, so that's the past tense of stride is strode. Covert. Now, a covert is a hiding place or a shelter. We like to think about somebody acting in a covert manner. It means they're hiding their mannerisms. So a covert is a hiding place. Then we have here mooring place. You moor a boat, and therefore the mooring place here is where the boat was originally tied and is now put back. A bark is not something a dog does. I mean, it is, but not in this case. A bark is another term for an old sailing boat. So earlier referred to as a pinnace, now as a bark. That comes from embark, you see, you embark a boat. Anyway, Undetermined. If you are undetermined, that means it's something that's not decided or settled on or unknown. So an undetermined sense means that it's an unknown sense. O'er means over. And finally, solitude. Solitude is a sense of being alone. It's again something that you feel as an individual, isolated and alone. As this poem is quite long, I've also done you a key for your annotations because I have annotated this poem for you, and instead of writing out each technique each time, I have put a letter to represent each of the techniques or things that I'm referring to. So the P is for personification, the O is for an oxymoron, an S represents a simile, an R is repetition, an AM is ambiguity, which obviously is when something has more than one meaning or interpretation. Then we have an L for light imagery, a V for a volta, which is a dramatic mood change or shift in tone. And A is alliteration, and a J is juxtaposition, or otherwise known as a contrast. So let's look at the first page. Now, the first thing to notice in the yellow section is our first piece of personification, which sits within the parenthesis, the brackets, as led by her. Now, the her here, feminine again, which is common to feminize this particular thing, is the moon. So one summer evening, led by her, I found a little boat. So the moon has been personified as female, links here to Mother Nature. Then we have more personification later on. Straight I unloosed her chain. Now here it is the unloosening of the boat, and the boat is personified as female as well. Then we have an act of stealth and troubled pleasure. The symbol there is the O for an oxymoron. So pleasure is something positive and kind of good, and yet troubled, if something's troubled, it's a negative imagery. So the two single words put together to create a phrase show this kind of contrast in the narrator. In the one sense, they know they're doing something wrong, they're acting stealthily, which causes them distress, and yet also equally causes them pleasure. It's exciting too. It shows this kind of teenage mischievousness that is happening to him here. Then we have small circles glittering idly in the moon, until they melted all into one track of sparkling light. So we have here this listing, this lovely description of light imagery here. Sorry, that's what the L is, not listing. It's light imagery, and it's all about the beauty of nature. It creates this calm tone, this beauty around him that he's kind of disrespectful of right now because he's not really noticing it at the moment. Then we move into the blue section. So we have a simile here, but now like one who rose proud of his skill. He's comparing himself here to somebody who is proud, who is strong. He's quite arrogant here, okay? He's acting above himself. With an unswerving line, I fixed my view. Unswerving means he's determined, straight ahead. He's got in his eye line where he wants to go. The horizon's utmost boundary, the summit, the craggy ridge far above, was nothing but the stars and the grey sky. Again, this epitomizes this sublime, this beautiful place that he is in right now, and it's described quite calmly, quite beautifully at the moment. Then we have the elfin pinnace. She was an elfin pinnace, so still describing this boat as being an elfin-like. It makes it sound quite magical, quite beautiful. Here. So we've got this kind of tranquil scene at the moment. Then we move into the green section. So lustily I dipped my oars into the silent lake. It's a very odd description to describe it as giving him almost sexual pleasure to dip his oars in. I like to wind up the rest of the English department by saying that I think most of this poem is actually about his kind of teenage occupied mind about sex and about his release of this frustration upon nature, but we won't go there right now. So I dipped my oars into the silent lake, and as I rose upon the stroke, the boat moves through. So this is another simile here, and we also get just after that the volta. So as I rose upon the stroke, my boat went heaving through the water like a swan. Again, this is a very strange simile because the sense of the heaving there suggests kind of power and strength, and yet like a swan suggests kind of grace and beauty. So we have this contrast again here, this odd juxtapositioning within that simile there to show a little bit of confusion, which then takes us into the volta on line 21, where we move quite starkly into this kind of shift in mood from the beauty to the strength and the power and the fear. So that's what the V is on when. Then we move into the red area where it becomes a lot more terrifying here. A huge peak, black and huge. So again, twice the repetition of huge to reinforce, to emphasize the height and the terrifying way that this mountain seems to be leaning over, towering over him. As if with voluntary power instinct upreared its head. So we have with the upreared its head, and if it's uprearing, it has been personified here. It's as if the mountain is alive and is moving and towering above him. Then I struck and struck again, repetition again, reinforcing here his kind of fear, his kind of frenetic energies, trying desperately to get away. With the struck and struck again, he's trying to strike out here with the oars to give chase, I guess, to run away. Then we have and measured motion, which is alliteration there, like a living thing, which is a simile, strode after me. So here we have the personified mountain, using measured motion as if it's thinking about it, it's calm, it's measured, it's alive, it's more adult if it's making measured decisions. It's like a living thing, so that's a simile but also personification, and it's striding after him. Again, determined steps full of power, which is terrifying. Then we have, and through the silent water, I stole my way. Now, the stole here can mean to steal something, because he did. He stole the boat. But also to steal away means to kind of creep away. So there's the odd ambiguity there with that use of that verb there. With stole, you could say that it's a nod to him accepting that what he did was wrong. So let's look at page 2 then, as we turn over to page 29. So back to the covert, the hiding place of the willow tree. He feels safe here now. This covert is hiding him away, and he is putting the boat back. There in her mooring place, so still personification of the boat as female, I left my bark. So he leaves the boat back where it was supposed to be, back safe. Through the meadows homeward went, in grave and serious mood. Now, the word grave in this capacity is ambiguous in that it could mean serious, because if something is a grave situation, it is a serious, sensible situation. But if Wordsworth meant it to mean serious, that line would then say in serious and serious mood. So there must be another reason he chose the word grave. So here in grave and serious mood could also have a symbol of death. We have this suggestion, this almost foreshadowing about imminent danger and perceived death. So this is how shook the narrator was by this particular experience. So that's an ambiguous phrase. Then we have some of our vocabulary, and then we get down to line 39, where we have this repetition of no here. No familiar shapes remained, no pleasant images of trees, of sea or sky, no colours of green fields. And as you'll know, that particular form of repetition, when it appears at the beginning of clauses, is anaphora. So we have here this emphasis, this triple use of no to reinforce what's now missing from his life, what he lacks, what has been removed and taken away from him. It offers a sense of emphasis as well. This is permanent. This has shaped and scarred him. He now does not see anything pleasant in the world because he is shook. And then that brings us on to that final line here, like living men, so but huge and mighty forms that do not live like living men, moved slowly through the mind by day and were a trouble to my dreams. Now, a trouble to my dreams is suggestive of nightmares. He is not just experiencing nightmares at night, though he also is being haunted in the daytime. Even when he's asleep, this reminiscence, this memory comes back to attack and remind him of his place in the sublime. Okay, so have a reread of the poem. Make sure that you understand the techniques that have been used and what's going on through it. Then I would like you to complete an amity for the poem. So that's the about, the mood, and particularly where the mood changes and shifts. Any ideas or themes that are apparent in this particular poem? There are many. So we've got things like nature, we've got individual experience, we've got memory, we've got power of humanity or diminished power of humanity, human versus nature, etc. Then techniques. So in the techniques section, as you know, you need to find 3 quotations and match those up to the techniques that are found, and explain the effect of them. And then finally, the why is your response. Now, once you've completed that amity, that will be really useful for your revision for the anthology poetry assessments, but you need to start to make links with other poems in the anthology. We can't just think of these poems as individual things in isolation to each other. So other poems that you could make links to are Storm on the Island, which also shows the power of nature versus humanity, fear, personification of nature too. Ozymandias, also power of nature, pride, and power of humanity. Remains as the power of memory, impact on human experience, i.e. the aftermath of the experience and how it impacts their life, and fear again. Poppies. Now, this is just a nice link, this one, but perhaps not as strong as some of the others. There is a memory of childhood and reminiscence in Poppies that is also found here in Wordsworth's poem. He's obviously, as an adult, gone back and written about this experience. And in Poppies, she wants to relive her son's childhood and remembers it. In Exposure, we have the power of nature versus humanity again, also human experience. Fear, personification of nature as attacking as well. So there's quite a few links to Exposure with this particular poem. And finally, Kamikaze, which also deals with individual experience, how nature impacts your life choices and memory. So, making a list of those, please try and think about which poems you would connect to this one if you were told to under some of those themes. And that's it from me. Thank you for listening.